Morning, everyone. Sorry, we got a full agenda as always. It's a meaty one today. So we're going to jump right in. A friendly reminder to everyone online and in the room. Comment and question within the EDC meeting is reserved for EDC members. So those that are observing, please kindly respect that. But we welcome your observations. So thank you for that. I'll start off with the business of approving the minutes from our February meeting. Can I get a motion for approval?
So moved.
Okay, second from Kate, Catherine. Any comments, questions? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The abstentions? Okay, the minutes reflect the minutes have been approved. All right, so we have a very full agenda today. And first, we have two esteemed guests joining us today to discuss the FY26 budget. We've got County Board Member and Liaison to the EDC, JD Spain.
Morning.
And our fearless, indefatigable.
Oh my God, I can't even spell that.
County Manager, Mark Schwartz. Thank you both for being here. And following our budget discussion, we'll hear from AED's Emily Cassell, who will tell us about the Tourism Improvement District. So two items. And before jumping into the agenda, I'd like to take about 5 minutes or so just to check in with membership on the ongoing impact of the federal workforce reduction efforts. Thank you to all that responded to my email soliciting feedback for this meeting. And as of our last meeting, only a month ago, contract terminations and layoffs were still relatively muted. It does feel like this trend is accelerating. And so I think it would be beneficial for the broader group and for JD and Mark to hear some of these anecdotes and observations from the leaders of our business community on how these federal workforce reduction efforts are impacting our community. That we're still very much in information gathering mode. Things are changing by the day. There's probably updates since even last week. And from a macro perspective, it's really still unclear what the overall impact for our county will be, right? And so I think part of what we can do is shed some light on that with some real-time anecdotes. I think this feedback will inform future potential actions that we can take as EDC. And it also sets a backdrop for the budget discussion that we're about to have. So with that, I'll open it up for comments and what people are seeing in real time. And Ben, I'll ask you to kind of kick things off because you're seeing things real time.
Yeah, I mean, I sugarcoat what I'm seeing. I mean, in fairness, our company does 90% of our work with the federal government. So we're on the front lines, I guess, of the change in administration. What we're seeing effect-wise is pretty profound to the industry, I would say. I'll just talk from our company first, right? We went into this year with 485 staff, maybe 10 positions we were hiring for. We're about to sign a long-term lease with Fuse. Since then, through just contracts that were signed, competed, have been terminated with no notice or rationale except for DOGE. See, we're at about 440 employees or so. No positions, no lease with Fuse. We'll see on that. Maybe, I mean, it's certainly not the end of the world, but what I see is a complete trend in contract terms that are happening across our firm and industry, largely indiscriminately. I have colleagues I talk to all the time in the region. There's a firm in Alexandria let go of 230 people 2 weeks ago, another 50 last week. A couple of them are out of business already. I mean, to me, it's a financial crisis for the region. It will not just be us federal contractors that are affected. It will be everyone else downstream. So my plea to anyone that has any voice is like, we have to put some meat behind Congress and their ability to control the purse so that they're not putting funding in place and then the agencies don't don't actually act on that funding. And the sooner we can stop the bleeding, the less irreparable it'll be. I'm not usually much for drama because we can always kind of control our fate, I always feel like. But this one is tough, and I think it takes a loud voice. We're seeing some Republican-led districts are able to get programs continued, but Democrat-led districts are not having a lot of success, which is unfortunate. But yeah, stop with my dire warnings. But
Thank you for that.
yeah.
Others?
We run 8 federal programs from 5 agencies in my department. So far, all of those are in support of small business. Some are in early stage tech. My concerns are about the pipeline of tech because of just the pullbacks that we've seen in NSF and NIH in particular. But the small business programs seem so far like they're continuing. I think if anything, it'll be the loan programs that are hit, not the service programs, but I could be wrong there. And personally, this feels like Detroit circa 2006.
Talk more about that. What's the analogy?
You see the initial wave, and then there will continue to be a ripple effect. So everybody you know is either directly or indirectly affected. And it, to your point, it won't just be government contractors. It will ultimately be everyone. You'll see a general slowdown, and it takes a long time to pull back out of that, and a lot of focused effort.
Thank you for sharing. Betsy?
From the safety net perspective, I think our greatest concern is what's going to happen with HUD. I think we weren't in the initial, what you're talking about, and that other than the kind of the spigots turned off then back on, that's fine. The contracts that were already signed, that we started programs, the funding has not come from. So now we're kind of hearing that a little bit as it goes through, which is a challenge. And we're not in the, we're off the hook. So that gray zone, depending on where HUD shakes out, is really going to be important to our ability to house people. And that's for, everyone in the safety net doing that, not just my organization.
Yeah, and on the HUD side, I mean, those are very, very meaningful dollars.
Yep.
That are
Yeah,
sent
they're
in.
big dollars and they're big impact. And they help in, certainly the county is dependent on those too, as far as the safety net is concerned. So I think, Mark, you and I are kind of in this one together, right? And it feels crummy.
Yeah.
To all of us.
Yes. Meredith?
So I run 2 civic organizations that we do not receive any federal dollars. We rely on foundational support and private support for our work. And we are actually seeing about 30% of our budget be placed on hold because investors are questioning the viability of their medium and long-term investment in civic organizations. And everyone is pausing to see directionality of the current administration and what that means for nonprofits or organizations over the longer term. And so I think the organizations I run, we're going out and finding new support, and we're in a fine position. But I know in our space, there are a lot of organizations that are in the process of shutting jobs and shutting down. Again, not because they're directly receiving federal dollars, but because the atmosphere is such that investors or foundations are questioning the viability of their investments in this space. And then I would love to hear from our small business owners. I know it's still perhaps a bit early on in the administration and the decisions that are being made, but to the extent to which you are noticing a change in demand for the work that we have here. And thank you, Mark, for letting me sit down and talk with you for a few minutes before we started. The question I have, I think it's clear that we can see the trend lines and what that means for the likely upward pressure on our commercial vacancy rates. And what does that mean for small businesses? And what does it mean also for how we are able to lean in and leverage this inflection point to make medium and longer term investments that will increase what we know we need: greater housing affordability. We need faster change for both families and small businesses to stay in Arlington. Medium term and long term, I have confidence that we will end out on the right side, but the decisions that we make now as a county are going to be important to ensure that we make the right longer term investments now.
Thank you, Meredith. And you bring up an interesting point in that even if your business isn't directly impacted by, reductions to the federal budget, the uncertainty creates a slowdown in and of itself. And we're seeing that on the commercial real estate side as well. And you bring up a good question. Steve, if we could ask you, are there any trends that you're seeing across, your businesses and your restaurants right now, or is it too early to tell?
There's definitely a softening, we feel like, in consumer sentiment. And I hear that across the broad range of the hospitality industry, locally, regionally, nationally, just, it was a rough winter, right? So you can factor that in and say, okay, when it's nice out, everyone comes out. But, I think you don't want to look at the stock market as a daily, kind of indicator of whether you should go out and spend money, but plenty of people that affects their spending patterns or consumer dynamics. So, we're just seeing a little softening, both in terms of guest counts and in terms of average spend. And the big thing I think I would tie to some of the more programmatic spending that may or may not emanate from the government stuff is business gatherings, which in a restaurant, that's more upscale can be a pretty prominent part of your sales mix. And that's about 40% of what it's been on a 5-year trend line right now. People just aren't getting together to spend money, do deals, or talk about pending deals and things like that. So, and I have a long background in, some higher end stuff, and I'm hearing that from them across the country. And you can see the way that's trading out in the public markets too with their guidance.
Kate, what are you seeing from and hearing from your constituents?
So, it's a mixed bag because we represent the whole business community, but restaurants in general, and again, don't want to speak for Stephen or Charles here, but we're hearing a lot of restaurant concern in general. This is as we approach budget. Again, Steve, our board chair here, we have our formal executive committee meeting tomorrow to talk through our policy positions, but we have heard from a lot of our restaurants specific concern about the meals tax increase. We had a number that joined us for the meeting we had with Richard Stevenson, the budget director. He said this is the worst possible time for us right now. They have a lot of data about what they're seeing and impact and spending being down. So that industry in particular, I think, I don't know if they're all connecting it directly to the federal space, but right now is a very challenging time for them. And it was interesting. We heard from Steve and I were talking about yesterday, 11 different restaurants, and it was everybody from Heidelberg Bakery, who just celebrated their big milestone, to, the new, cool, socially focused restaurant, Immigrant Food. They're all speaking up and concerned about that increase and what it might mean to them. And I think that speaks to a little bit about what's going on in the broader climate. Betsy talked about the nonprofit space. That's one area that we've heard a lot from our nonprofits. So we're convening a meeting coming up with Anita Friedman from the County Health and Human Services to talk about, again, what's going on in the federal space and guidance to the nonprofits. I think I've heard from a number of them that it's a bit of a tightrope in terms of, try to say it's delicately, resist but also comply, of figuring out what those lines are to walk and making sure that they're doing everything in alignment. Because again, a number of them have voiced that they are not political organizations, although some of them are. And so their number one focus is on serving their clients. So, what do they need to do to uphold their values, but still be able to make sure that they get those important funds to be able to do their great work.
It's great color. Nick, can I ask you to share? You've seen some interesting trends that are perhaps counter to some of this.
Yeah, it's in my role in the office world. Generally, we're involved. We're having conversations. I'd say anywhere between 6 months and 24, 30 months in advance of these decisions being made. So I would generally categorize it as like forward-looking indicators. My colleagues and I were a little bit confused, frankly, because, we hear these anecdotes and we read the news, and you would think that our industry would just be on hold. But what we're seeing right now is very different than that. When we look at our new inquiries and leases being signed and term lengths of those deals, so in other words, confidence, over the last 90, 100, really 6 months, they've continued to go up. And I just looked at our numbers over the past year to date, let's call it 75 days. Very small sample size, I fully recognize that. But it's been the highest, at least for us, that it has been since 2019. So again, it's kind of two very different things that we can't really draw trends from yet. But I just wrote down here the last few deals we've done in Arlington. This is in the last, 45 days, media company, defense company, nonprofit think tank, financial services, software, and legal services. So it seems like it's a pretty wide variety. We're very cautious, as an industry and our team. But when we're looking at our workflow, it continues, interestingly, to stay, I'd say, steady and even increase.
So if I could riff off of that for 1 second, one thing that we are seeing on the positive side is we're seeing a significant uptick in people interested in starting small businesses across Northern Virginia. So we kind of expected to see that. That's usually what happens during an economic downturn. Also, we see more people going back for advanced degrees.
And I would throw out just a very brief comment. Financial markets, I mean, you've all seen this, and this is following up on Stephen's comments and a couple of the others. Anything that where your customers are market sensitive, I mean, the volatility is not going to go away. Markets don't like uncertainty. They'd rather have bad policy than uncertain policy. And it seems pretty clear that we're going to just continue to get whipsawed. Question is whether and when the bond police come in, right? Rates are high. Do they get higher?
Yeah.
So that's, buckle up, buttercup. That's not.
So, yeah, and this is great feedback. So thank you. And because I think that high level for this group, we should continue to do real-time information gathering and sharing so that we can pass it up to the county board and the staff so that we can adjust appropriately. We've got a lot of things going on, right? I mean, this, we are still dealing with CMRI. Now we have this large federal workforce reduction that is impacting our region disproportionately. On top of that, the overall kind of national uncertainty with respect to the tariffs, among other things. But everything there's kind of ups and downs. I mean, the one thing that I see is the 10-year Treasury is 4.2.
Yeah.
So that's a positive. I mean, that's down almost 30 basis points relative to the beginning of the year. There's still a lot of uncertainty. And I think we should all brace for kind of net negative impact relative to our region. So this is good. So thank you for sharing. And with that, I'll pass it on to, sorry, go ahead, JD.
I'll do a quick follow-up question. Well, good. Thank you for your anecdotes. Paul, I just want to come to you for a second. Sometimes folks don't discuss the elephant in the room, but there's been a lot of attack on institutions with DEI, right? We saw what is going on in Georgetown, Columbia, you name it. So I'm just curious to know, how is GMU, more specifically, what's going on with Fuse and a whole lot of things, how are they positioning themselves for what's going on right now nationally, where institutions that have these type of programs are at risk of losing federal funding?
Great question. And I will say it's a mixed bag. So on the downside, the NIH indirect fees hurt us a lot. Not as much as it would have other organizations. More than half of Mason's research portfolio is defense, not NIH, but going from 56% indirect to 15% indirect takes a really big chunk. And Mason, as everybody knows, was already the worst funded university in the state on a per student basis. So that's hard. I mean, you see Stanford and Harvard doing hiring freezes, and we've been in a hiring freeze for pretty much since I've been here. So, and almost 5 years now. So you see a big, in some ways we've always been lean, but it's certainly going to hurt. We know that there's a coming interest in advanced degrees, but also you see a lot of universities are clamping down on the number of people they can take for advanced degrees. So we don't know how that's going to impact us one way or another. As far as Fuse goes, I got to give a tour to Nick this past week. We're giving about a tour a day. I have 2 tours today. So still interest in the space. And yes, we're hoping that we see you back soon. Our smaller suites seem like they're pretty much locked in. We haven't heard anything else, and there's still a lot of interest. So, hope is a bad management tool, but I'm kind of hoping that it's not as dramatic as what I know it could be and what I've witnessed before.
I will just say, we can talk later, but I do have some concern about the students here in Arlington, especially which are hiring and who are here on student visas. If those students have been identified and how we are having conversations with them. Kate, thank you for your information about the meal tax. We can have a continued conversation about that. And just in generality, I know our county managers here. I think I was in a meeting this weekend with some elected leaders, and we were talking about, how does Virginia in this moment, working with our governor, because we're going to have to work somewhat insular, right? How are we demanding of the governor, right, to really engage with business? As we know, Northern Virginia, in large part, a lot of the revenue stream that goes around the state comes out of our hub. So I'm not sure what the appetite is in here. We'll have additional conversations, but I think it is time to hold our governor also to task here in the Commonwealth and ask what he is doing also to help our businesses from the state perspective, right? So that's quite broad, but just want you to know those are some conversations that are going on with a few folks. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, JD. Good news is that the county and the state are aligned, so that's good news. We will turn it over to Ryan for his comments.
Thanks. Just one quick, two quick updates. One is earlier or in February, we launched the Tech Launchpad, a new initiative from the Business Investment Group, which is focused on spurring investment from domestic and international tech companies. We started with I think I've explained before, we're doing a virtual component, a partially in-person component later this spring, and then the hope is to have this as a long-term program that we can bring companies to Arlington for extended stays to kind of immerse them into our community and hopefully get them to start forming their business here. So our virtual program had 80 companies attending from across the world. Some folks had to get up in the middle of the night to be with us because they were on the other side of the planet. So we really appreciate the interest, and we had really great engagement from our staff, and we had some local tech startups join us, and Amazon spoke about their presence here. So as I mentioned, this was kind of the precursor to hosting 12 companies in May when as part of this the annual Select USA conference. So we're really excited about this, and kudos to Michael's team for getting this up and running. The second just announcement is that our creative placemaking grant applications are open until March 21st. That's the new program that's funded with one-time funding from the county board that is trying to really focus on bringing art and combining art and placemaking and bringing new features to our community. We will be awarding two $50,000 grants to companies, and I heard yesterday we've already had about a dozen applications for that program. So happy to talk more afterwards. And thank you to Charles for agreeing to be the EDC kind of representative on that panel. Thank you very much. Kevin, the only other thing is you have a new economic indicators report, which we can talk about afterwards if anyone has any questions. And after that, that's it.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. So on to our main event. Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you so that we can talk about it.
Everybody, I want to thank you for those uplifting comments to get it started. But always happy to be here. A couple of things when we're talking about the budget. So I introduced the budget on February 22nd, and all of you, looking around the table, most of you have to deal with budgets. So we didn't put the budget together on February 22nd. We were putting it together at the end of January. We were wrapping it up. So we were doing a lot of trying to anticipate what might happen. And if any of you knew what was going to happen after January 20th, I think you've all proven to be wrong. The depth and breadth of sort of the uncertainty. Markets don't like uncertainty. And so trying to deal with that level of uncertainty, in some ways, I feel a little bit happy that we're able to prepare the budget pretty much before January 20th, because I'm not sure how we would have prepared it knowing now. But it's in the county board's wise hands, and they'll figure out what to do with that. But so the first thing that we actually did is, to the extent that we ever have flexibility in our budget, we're able to do some things. This year, all that flexibility went into our budget stabilization reserve. we've added $11 million to a stabilization reserve that has about $22 million to start. And that is the reserve that we've talked to the rating agencies about, which is we have that big 5.5% of our general fund balance we put into, I call it the Armageddon fund. You know, we'll never touch that. Never. But we have another fund that has 1.3%. We're increasing that up to 2%. So, but when you think about it, that gives us about $33 million to deal with a whole tidal wave of potential impacts. Our federal funding that comes into the county budget, the lowest number that you'll ever hear me quote is around $90 million. We have about $90 million of our federal funding that comes into our budget, but that is a low estimate because it does not include all the money that we have relied on for transportation capital projects, which is around 60 to 70 million. And then it does not include any of the things, I think Betsy made reference to this, which is that our nonprofit partners are relying on funding that they get. So it is really an underestimate. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that even though we added $11 million to our flexibility reserve, that in any way is going to be able to sort of address the larger implications if they all come to fruition. But I will say this, as of March 11th, we have not, as of today, we have not lost a single penny of federal dollars. That doesn't mean we haven't gone through a lot of anxiety, being told that things were going to be frozen. Anytime we've actually drawn funds tried to go draw funds from HUD, for example, the money's there. I think that maybe they just haven't quite figured out how to implement some of the things that they've said. So I'm not particularly optimistic about that. But we did in the proposed budget, even though we saw revenue growth at a level of around 3.5%, and our costs overall are going up a little bit over 4%, we're still able to set aside funds for our safety net. Okay, and so that means based on the needs we conceived of at the time, we've added in funds for housing grants, which is really important for us. But we also had to combine that with cuts. We're shedding 44 positions, which is about 1% of our workforce. And we never like to do that. Half of those positions are filled. We're also able to make some adds in strategic areas, which are, when I say strategic areas, that's a shorthand for saying things we didn't have a choice. So if there's like a new contract that was negotiated for our bus service and it costs $4 million more, we had to put it in. Okay, so that was a strategic decision. I wanted to let you know that. We have a lot of those. So we also have, in addition to the stability issue that we've talked about, we are, I think, for the most part, we've done the minimum I would have liked to do. We're still committed to CMRI, and we're doing our work on that. I know Ryan, I'm not going to look at Ryan's face when I say this, but we made an intense, deep commitment to AED by giving Ryan $750,000 of walking around money that he can figure out how to use that money to stave off all the tidal wave of circumstances. But that is actually, I think you probably will talk a little bit about that. We haven't sort of said exactly what that money needs to go for. It might continue some of the programs that are already in place. Meals tax. Okay, so the meals tax, when we proposed it, I still think it is, of all the revenue options we had on the table, the best. Doesn't mean it's necessarily a good option, but we try to look at it in our competitive position. So Fairfax, for the first time, is going ahead with the meals tax in their proposed budget. The District of Columbia is at 4.5%. Alexandria is at 5%. We tend to look at it in our competitive position with surrounding jurisdictions. We think that our proposal doesn't do any harm. Now, if you're a restaurant owner, it may, it's open to question, where the people will be making their decision about whether they go out to a restaurant based on this. I happen to think there are bigger factors at play because it tends to be more of a discretionary decision on the part of people. If you're in a 2 federal employee workhouse, work in your house, you have 2 federal employee wage earners, are you going to go out to eat as much? Probably not. So we've made some assumptions about the revenue coming from that. We're paying close attention to where the revenue is going. Some of the leading indicators on sales and meals are softening a little bit, but It's a little bit too early to say. So let's see. We have done a lot of this in the past where we felt, I think I was quoted in the paper as saying I was hearkening back to what happened in 9/11, what happened with the base realignment and closure, what happened with the recession of 2008, and some of the challenges we've faced 9/11, that this has the worst elements of all of them. Because at least in COVID, for example, we knew we were going to get a flood of money from the federal government. Here we know we aren't. Okay. And the thing that's the worst part about this, that combines all the worst elements of that, is, again, as Catherine was saying, the uncertainty. So it's so hard to do this. And to that respect, it reminds me of a lot of the budgeting we did 5 years ago, which is we came out with a budget in February of 2020. It was irrelevant the following month. The budget I proposed is still relevant. I fear, though, that by the time the board adopts it in April and by the time we get to July, it may be irrelevant, which has meant in the past, we always come back and we have to do tweaks and adjustments. And we'll do it, and we're going to do it, and we're always there. We have a strong financial, our house is in we have strong reserves, a strong ethic. We have a board that's always willing to make the tough decisions. I don't have any doubt that we'll be a rock of stability in the region, but that will mean pain. So one thing, and I'm going to wrap up on this, because Meredith came by and was talking to me a little bit about this. I haven't done this before, but I included in my budget a page and a half of cuts that we would take if we weren't getting revenue. It hasn't really gotten a lot of attention, but I put it in there. I didn't want to freak out the workforce, but we have a list of programs we would look at to cut if the revenues don't arrive. So that is something we spent a lot of time thinking about, how we talk about it. And that is a place where you might want to go take a look at, to the extent those of you who don't like the meals tax, there are some other options laid out there. So I think, let's see if there's anything else I wanted to add. No, I mean, actually, there is one thing I wanted to add. I wanted to thank each of you in this room, because I come here every year. You are all working very hard, just like I am and like Ryan is, especially Kevin's working really hard. By the way, the fact that Kevin is chair this year and things are going to hell in a handbasket, there is no connection, right? I wanted to be clear about that.
Correlation is not causation.
Yeah, it's not causation. So
We're lucky to have him.
So we really do, and I mean this quite sincerely, we really do listen and appreciate all the work you've done on what's happening in the market. And we really do take cues from you, as I know the board does. Your voice is incredibly valuable to us. And I just wanted to thank you, because I know not all of you, but most of you, you're not shy about sharing your opinions. They are heard. It doesn't mean we always pay attention to them, but they're heard. And I do really appreciate all the work that the EDC has done over the years. And it's you've actually, some of your ideas made their way into the budget over the last few years. So with that, our budget's online. It's a $1.7 billion budget. We boiled it all down to one page. You want to carry this with you like I do. It's an infographic that talks about all the places we made investments. And I like to say that I'm the only one who gets the assignment of having to make, at least initially, all the hard choices about where to add, where to cut. And usually I never make anybody happy. So that is all I really wanted to say. And I'm happy to take questions.
We're gonna have a lot of feedback, so
I'm sorry, I have to go.
I see a hand. Paula, go ahead.
Yeah, Mark, are there any areas of Arlington that have TIF districts right now? And is that something that's ever been considered? If we're gonna see kind of a downslide, it's the opportunity.
You know, we have a TIF in Crystal City that's been there since about 2010. We also have a small TIF that is centered around Ballston Quarter, and a small TIF along Columbia Pike. So we, when we start our budget, we take the revenues, we take a little bit off the top that goes directly to Crystal City and the kind of investments there. And Columbia Pike, it's a much smaller one. In Ballston Quarter, it's a little more of a sort of very esoteric kind of TIF that was put in to support the bonds associated with the redevelopment of Ballston Quarter. I'm not a big fan of TIFs. all those TIFs that I just mentioned came before. I just don't like the way it limits flexibility, but that doesn't mean it isn't a tool that we've looked at in the past or might look forward into the future. We would not support a TIF around George Mason University. I'm just kidding.
Wouldn't work.
No, it wouldn't work because you have complete control of what you do. We can't tell you what to do.
Well, and it's university's tax.
Because, yeah, I know, you're exact. You have the best of all worlds and the worst of all. Yeah, but we have 3 of them in the county.
Can you talk briefly about, I know a lot of folks have heard about the 44 FTEs. Can we just talk that at the end of the day, it's not really 44 FTEs.
Well, right.
Lose it all together. It'll probably just be
The 44 FTEs, of those, 26 of the positions are vacant, okay? So we're very careful to target that. And of the 18 positions that are filled, we're spending a lot of time working to make sure that people land in other positions in the county. We have a couple of hundred vacancies. The jobs that are available sometimes don't fit with the skill set for people who we've asked to let go, but we try very, very hard. And as JD was referencing, at the end of the day, there's probably going to be a couple of people that we might not be able to place, or the board might add the positions back. But just think a little bit about it when you're sitting there. I've heard from a lot of county employees who are incredibly thankful, basically with the chaos going on in the federal government. They go, gee, thanks. Except for those people, the 18 or 19 people, I haven't heard from them thanking me, because it can be really sort of jarring for them what's going on. We have very generous severance packages and all that, but I really hate doing that. But one of the places where we had to do it, and I didn't really focus on this a little bit, is we proposed some fairly significant fee increases around the development fund, which is not something I wanted to do, but the development fund has been really hit between the eyes with a sort of a triple whammy of a lack of projects coming through, a growth in the fund and employment, and then fees that weren't really focused on covering full costs. So that's been a real stress point for us, but I appreciate that you bringing that up, JD.
So Mark, on that note, and I do think it's, for this group, as we talk about some of the offsets on the revenue side, the meals tax is meaningful. I think based on the budget, it's projected to add about $13 million in revenue.
Right. Yep.
And then the fee recovery is also pretty significant. It's about $4 million.
Yep.
And I think in this environment, we all appreciate that there's enough pain to go around, right? So everyone's has to kind of bear some of this. And so I think there's probably a more robust debate going on. I think the one thing to point out relative to the fee is for the entitlement process, some of the 4.1 fees. In the context of the overall development budget, you could argue that they are insignificant. I think one thing to keep in mind is that where these fees are being incurred is during the speculative part of the process, and it's pre-development. And so on one hand, it feels like a fee that is very that can be supported by these projects should they go forward. On the other hand, it's increasing the cost of taking that bet or potentially taking that bet. So I would just offer that that's something to keep in mind as we're factoring that in.
Yeah, so we're actually having a work session today. The board's had about 12 or 13 work sessions looking at budgets. And today we're going to be talking about human services. And we're also going to be talking about CPHD, which is our housing and development. We have a long discussion in there about fees. And you're absolutely right. Some of the upfront costs, you put a lot of money on the table if you're in the development community, speculating that a project will make its way all the way through the process. In addition to paying architects, which, who understands that, but paying lawyers, come on. I mean, you're paying lawyers all the time. Don't you think, Evan? Yeah. I mean, that's really important. But some of these other costs, I'll make the argument that for the overall project cost, they're fairly insignificant. They don't even come to close to 1% of the project cost. Where they happen, though, in the project pipeline is significant. So one of the things that we're make sure to do with these fees and sort of the changes we've made there is that we have not cut back on any, I think in a significant way, the throughput that you need and the work you need to do with our staff about getting some pre-filing consultation. I think we've really made some strides there. We have made sure not to cut back on that. And I welcome thoughts from the room, but we have really tried to open up our doors to, and I know Mark McCauley's here, the folks in AED, to sit down with people when the projects are a gleam in your eyes before you spend a lot of money, to try to get a sense of what the issue is. If you have a client that's has a prospective piece of property or project, we've really opened our doors to do that consultation. So we realize there's some fees that come with that, but we have tried really, really hard to make it worthwhile. I think the bigger challenge, frankly, and I can be persuaded otherwise, is what's happening in the capital markets to get the financing. And I think that at the end of the day, that has proven to be a real challenge. We've had a number of entitled projects. The General Assembly didn't increase the viability of site plans. You're all going to have to come back. We've seen some projects that have been entitled for a while that are going by the wayside because of that economic uncertainty. And I mean, I don't mean to say therefore our fees are wonderful, but I'm just saying of all the challenges that you face, I think they're sort of lower on the list, but they are a challenge. And Andy Van Horn's looking at me like, what planet are you from? What are you talking about?
Well, I would agree with you. I mean, right, I've been in the market a little bit lately because we've been thinking about buying a big apartment kind of portfolio. And the capital markets have chilled on DC pretty significantly since DOGE implemented. Because they worry about the flow through of housing impacts and rent collection and all that. And so, the portfolio definitely is worth less than it was a month and a half ago in the eyes of investors. And DC is now on the recession, target list. And so why are people going to invest here for the next 3 or 4 years?
Yeah,
Still buying?
still buying.
Are you still buying?
Still trying to raise
Getting
capital.
cheaper.
Yeah, and that's frankly, with a development fund, we rely on an estimate of projects that are coming through the pipeline. We have got it wrong for the last 3 years. We've been unbelievably optimistic about the number of projects coming through. So you can only generate the revenue based on the number of projects coming through. We will have to see what happens, but that has really created a lot of pressure in that fund, which is unfortunate. So,
Mark.
Steve, how's your program going?
Well, they're earning money, employed and growing great.
How many are employed with Arlington County?
Well, 44 less than,
Yeah.
we've lived with CMRI for a while.
Right.
And the county continues to rely on taxes that are in that regard tied to the number of occupied square feet that businesses lease, as you know.
Right.
Restaurants, by definition, pay those taxes as well as are affected by the meals tax,
Right.
which you're now proposing an increase to. If you look at a simple building, Barley Mac, for example, is in the ground floor of a building in Roslyn, right? Lion Hall, ground floor of a building in Roslyn. They're going to be saddled with a new meals tax, an increase to the meals tax, and they're going to continue to pay the taxes, or their landlord will, for the occupied square feet. But the tenants above them, these offices that may house businesses that are growing, they may continue to grow. They have been growing. Their revenue grows, their bottom line grows, their headcount grows. And yet those businesses, if they shrink their square footage, are actually paying less effectively to the county because their occupation, their occupied square foot is low. While my friend here continues to not only pay for the full amount of square footage that he has, but now instead of being befriended by his county board and county manager, he's being targeted by having a meals tax that goes up. Shouldn't we be cutting the meals tax now instead of raising it? Because this will invite more people to Arlington to enjoy the restaurants that we have, while the offices above them and the white collar businesses, one of which I used to own and run, are shrinking their footprints while our headcounts and profits rise.
There was a question in there, right?
Well, it's simply displaying the dichotomy here where
Right.
we're targeting the ground floor of these buildings, and yet the white collar businesses above are paying effectively less when they are growing and earning more money.
Okay. I am not in the restaurant business for a good reason, okay? Because I don't know anything about it. And I'm really cautious about telling saying to Steve Fedorchak, how his restaurants work or don't work. But the one thing I am confident about, which is that the question about competitive position on Arlington versus surrounding jurisdictions, we spent a lot of time. The meals tax has been in place since 1991 at 4%. Okay. We have the ability to raise it. It can go up to as high as 6%. That authority was given to us about 4 or 5 years ago. We've been very, very reluctant to increase it. But as we looked around and we saw Alexandria raise it from 4 to 5%, the district's at 4.5%. And we had some strong inklings that Fairfax, which hasn't had one, it looks like they're definitely going to adopt one. We felt like it was the least of a set of evils to do. Okay. That now I'm not going to say that won't affect some people's decisions about whether they go out to eat. I frankly think that the family that again has 2 earners that work for the federal government who's in a state of high stress, they are going to be thinking about not going out to eat because their jobs are gone, not because what Arlington County is doing for the meals tax. And I will take slight exception if anybody's thinking this somehow means that we don't love our restaurants or what's happening in the business areas of the county, because I don't think that's true. I think this is just an example of having to make a hard choice. So that doesn't mean that I expect people to agree with it. And if you need help with your talking about, what you should say is we're raising the meals tax by 25%. That sounds much more horrible, but okay. That'd be a good talking point.
Did you want to rebut since your name was invoked?
I don't know if I'm right. And I just,
I mean, it's so nice to have such enthusiastic advocacy, first of all. So I appreciate that. Hey, I'm a pragmatist. Do I agree with you to some extent that $1 on $100 is not a flex point on making a decision to dine? Of course I do. I've been involved with the Restaurant Association of Metropolitan Washington for a long time, former chair. We just don't like single industry taxes directed at restaurants. And I think that can resonate with everyone too. So when you're scrolling through CNBC this morning and something came out on airlines seeing declining path, and Dick's came out and said the consumer's getting cautious, it's just death by 1,000 cuts in terms of consumer sentiment. And that's why the timing seems unfortunate if you're in my position. I get it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, and I just like to throw these things out that I'll know you'll never succeed on, is the EDC could work with us to allow Congress to give us the ability to tax the meals that go through Reagan National Airport. It would make everything wonderful, but they took that away from us in the 1940s. So, but that would really ease our financial burden.
Yeah, and I'll just say one thing anecdotally, and this is,
Get to work on it.
You referenced the adjacency in terms of coming up with this proposed 1% increase to adjacent counties. It's friendly with the Norton family, who owns Great American Restaurants, highly concentrated in Fairfax. And they've hired their own lobbyists. They've been going hard against a meals tax in Fairfax County for a long time, to the point where John says if a meals tax is enacted in Fairfax County, we will never open another restaurant in Fairfax County. And that may sound like posturing, but they have 45 years of equity behind them and a strong stance on how they run their business in the context of their jurisdictions and the relationship with the electeds. And so there's just some of that out there too.
And you're absolutely right about that. My colleagues in Fairfax have tried for several attempts to get the meals tax through.
Right.
And because of that, they haven't been doing it. But this year, they actually, in some ways, face a worse budget situation than we do.
Yep.
And the question becomes, if you're going to raise revenue in a situation where the economy isn't performing all that well, it comes down to, I'm not a politician, but it comes down to, you want to raise the real estate tax on the people who are voting? Okay, I'm just being crass about it. Or do you want to raise it in some other way? They are looking at that meals tax as a way to avoid some pretty big increases in real estate tax bills for the residents of Fairfax County. So I know that the owners have made that comment. I'm not sure they're going to be as persuasive this time through as they were the last few.
Clearly not. And the 6 million or the 6% out there I think it equates to $200 million.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
And I will offer this. I mean, if we could just zoom out, the impact here of the meals tax is $13 million of potential revenue in the context of a $7 billion budget, right? And some of the clouds on the horizon dwarf all of these things, right? And as we're talking about a potential real estate tax increase, a meals tax increase, a fee increase, service reductions, I think the answer is we have to do all of those things.
Yeah.
In the context.
And if I could just add, Kevin, so, I also spent some time talking about fiscal 27. And, usually all of you who've ever been involved with budgets, everyone says, you never do a 1-year budget. You always have to look out 2 or 3 years. And we always said that we did that, but we didn't really do that all that intensely because we always thought, things were going pretty well. But I really am, there are some things that I did not propose in the budget this year that we need to keep in our back pocket for the future. There are things that we didn't do that, I do not have a hiring freeze right now because I think it's really important for us to continue to do services. I did not, and the board advertised, and I understood why they did it, a real estate tax rate increase. I didn't propose that. I didn't propose a whole series of fees. We're going to need those in our back pocket for what's happening next year. And the other thing is, and I'm just going to say this because there's nobody from the state sitting in this room. For years, everybody's sitting around this table and AED, we've given the Commonwealth of Virginia its seed corn with money. We send more money down there than they ever gave back to us. So the governor is doing this thing where he's talking about there's enough jobs in Virginia. You tell federal employees that they can go be a pipe fitter in Buchanan County. I mean, that's sort of what he's saying. It's ridiculous. And the General Assembly and our delegates down there need to return the favor that we've done over the last 20 years, where we've sent so much more money down there. This is the time where they have to send the money back. I don't care what your political persuasion is. We've been the economic engine of the Commonwealth. And if they want to let it sputter and die for some sort of political reason, I think that's crazy. That makes no business sense. So if you're talking about all the levers that we have to use, if any of you are members of the House of Delegates, I'm just kidding, or a Senate, or the governor, I mean, he's being very short-sighted about this. So I guess, and I won't even say he's doing that because he wants a position in the administration. That would be the wrong thing to say.
So lots of hard decisions. Mark, I will leave you with 2 things. One is, that I did read that page of projected cuts or prospective cuts.
That makes one person. I think now, wait, 2, 3? I know JD read it.
If we could get a link to that and see that page of perspective cuts, just so that we can understand.
Right, I'll give you an example. It's not, we've said we have a lot of library branches. I don't want to close any of them, but closing one library branch, the world will continue to revolve around its axis. Sorry, it would, but I would get burned in effigy in Glen Carlin or in Sherrydale.
Where I was going with that is even if there's this page and a half of very hard cuts, it only adds up to 13 million.
Right, it does.
These are not big enough dollars in the context of the clouds ahead of us, right? I think that's the big picture message that we need to keep in. These are, yes, they're very hard cuts, but it's only $13 million.
Yeah.
Right, and that's also sort of what I said about our stabilization fund. We are trying to do what we can. The macroeconomic forces we're facing are profound.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to sit here and say that we really control our destiny in that way.
Meredith?
Fully understand and support that we're going to need to make some tough choices, and I'm confident that together we can make those choices. Very happy to go down to Richmond anytime to make the case for our county, and eager to do so. And just one last macro point. I know that we're probably way behind, but these are very important conversations to have. I was
5 minutes of 8. We're good.
Okay. I think with some of the macro forces at work, and Ryan, going back to some of the comments you made at the last meeting about one of your biggest concerns is brain drain. How do we protect our talent in this county and grow it forward? Because that is a cornerstone of our growth now and moving forward. I think that, and I'm heartened when I'm looking at the budget, I'm looking at how our schools are funded. 80% of the schools funding comes from the county. We only get 4.2% of federal funding and 9% of state funding. A lot of what keeps young families in Arlington are the quality of our schools and the education that children here get. So for the 25 to 34-year-olds, Maybe some of them are not having children, but they want to stay here because they know of the quality of our schools as well. I'm not saying that we're not going to have to make some cuts down the road if the macro forces continue to put downward pressure. But what I am saying is I would welcome, Mark, your thoughts on how is the county preparing
Right.
potential onward stresses, and what does that mean for the quality of the schools, the public schools that are
Right.
still
So,
here?
I didn't spend any time talking about this, but our biggest expenditure in our budget, we spend close to, of that 1.7 billion, almost 650 million is going to schools. So that's our biggest single expenditure. And you've all known me long enough to know when we were trying to woo Amazon, and I know because Boeing is about to announce a huge expansion in the county. Is that right, Joe? I'm just kidding. No, because because of our schools and what we have, that is really our most critical expenditure. So the school board and superintendent are going to come out with their budget on Thursday. They'll be making some cuts, but I want you to look at their budget, just like our budget. We're making cuts, but our budget's still growing. And so we're doing that. And then when it comes to our employees, I really, as JD pointed out, there's hopefully just a few that are going to be affected, but we still I have not done a hiring freeze. We actually have an environment right now, you would not believe the hundreds of resumes we're getting for every opening. Okay. And there's some very talented people in there. I'm not going to call it a silver lining, but it is certainly on the plus side that we're getting some highly qualified people. And we actually, it's not really a joke, but we're looking at, I don't know how many of you knew Ruben Varghese, our public health director. He retired about 4 or 5 months ago. So we just are going to put out in the street this week to hire a public health director. And you were talking about NIH. I'm looking forward to seeing who gets to apply for that. So if anything, the quality of our workforce will go up. And that's the reason why we have, pay increases in there for them. But it is, again, a incredibly challenging environment. I did want to throw one other thing out there. I spent a lot of time talking with my colleagues in the region, and I want you all, and Andy knows what I'm talking about, say a little prayer for the district because of a little oversight that Congress has on their continuing resolution. They've got to fix that. They're going to be $1 billion short. If that happens, we're all going to see the impact of that. That will be really devastating.
So on the early capital market side, one indicator we're seeing is, and some have attributed it, I don't know if this is true or not, to maybe thinking SBIRs are going to be pulled back, or that there might be a lack of them. We run an investor breakfast series, which Arlington County is a sponsor of. This time we saw more applications than we've ever seen by early stage companies looking for venture capital. So like way more than we've ever seen. So there's also concern about the early stage tech side, and because I'm a fan of that particular sector, leaning into that and knowing that that's what we need to diversify the economy to fight another day, so we can cut. But you also have to invest in the things that have a high return on investment. That's one of those things that has a high return on investment.
Yeah. So Michael, who's sitting behind you, did you give him talking points? He talks to me about that all the time.
See you over there.
So thank you for the robust discussion. And I will, as chair, leave you with one. If there was one thing that I, as chair, would ask you to focus on, it is don't take the foot off the pedal on CMRI. The staff and the county have done such a great job of building momentum behind this. I thought that the policy that was passed at the end of the year was very well crafted.
Adaptive reuse. Where's Mark McCauley? Raise your hand. Mark, round of applause.
The adaptive reuse piece, but the policy I thought was even more impactful, and it sets the stage for, I think that if we could, I know that MMA is on the work plan.
Mixed martial arts?
Yes, yes.
Just kidding.
So we can and one of the proposed cuts is the principal planner and the CPHD. And my understanding is that position feels capacity for CMRI initiatives. That is absolutely hands down the highest ROI investment that we can be making, right? It's like the multiple is ridiculous. So I would just leave you with that. We will have, go ahead.
No, I would say, I have proposed cutting a principal planner and comprehensive planning, I think, every year for the last 4 or 5 years, and the board always adds it back. But I feel like I want to make my argument about why I would do that. I think that when it comes to, this is a little bit more, I'm not talking about taking the foot off the pedal with CMRI. Who wouldn't want to talk about major and minor amendments? Who wouldn't want to talk about the sign ordinance? But this particular position tends to be focused on things like we went through on Langston Boulevard, we went through a planning process that was as long as Langston Boulevard. Okay. It's just our planning processes can be a little bit more compact and succinct. And by losing one principal planner, I think we'll be able to deliver on all of those. If I thought we were going to be making that cut and it's a vacant position that was going to affect CMRI, I wouldn't have done that. And we have the resources to do that. Now, the board may end up adding back that position because of the argument you're making, but we have to be, our next steps on CMRI, and Mark could talk more about it, is we're going to look at the major minor, also look at the sign ordinance, which frankly, was about 15 or 20 years ago. The county board said, we want to get out of the business of dealing with anything having to do with signs. Now we're going to bring the county board back into the business of dealing with signs, but pretty low cost. We can do some things that will make it clear to people that, by having signs that are a little bit bigger, not affecting the view shed on the National Mall, that we can do some things. And there's some other small things that we can do, and really some big steps we can take with CMRI 3.0, which I can't reveal the contents of it because it's all up in Ryan's head. But I will talk a little bit about it. CMRI 1.0 and 2.0, we're talking about removing barriers and making things easier. The next phase of that, which we're not ready to go to, but we will start talking about, is why don't we have a county that comes to you with ideas about what we can do in certain parts of the county, as opposed to waiting for you all to come to us with specific proposals. Let's look at places in the county where we know development could be entitled and give you our thoughts about what makes sense there, so that when you have to sit around think of ideas, you can just take our ideas because you know that they're so good. I'm being a little bit facetious here, but these are things that are done in other jurisdictions where we actually, economic development marries with planning to say, here are some ideas about what we think makes sense. And that makes it a little bit easier on everybody. That is sort of the final capstone piece to CMRI. So stay tuned. And I think everyone's probably forgotten about that cut to the planning position, right?
Yeah. Yes. Andy.
Mark, if you are really thinking about moving to that CMRI 3.0, if you could make sure that includes proper costs, so the full picture is known, that'd be really amazing.
Absolutely. No, I think that's something we have to do because we acknowledge that ends up coming at the end of the equation. If we talk about it up front, not in necessarily an overt way, because as much as we love to talk about it, we don't want to have the community involved right up front and sort of doing the bargaining. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, very robust discussion, Mark. It is always the highlight of my EDC calendar year when you come speak to us.
Right. You need to do a better job with your program.
JD, thank you. You guys are welcome to stay, but a round of applause.
All right, what's next? Tourism Improvement District?
Yes.
Another way to take money out of the economy?
Yeah,
I love that.
exactly.
I'm just kidding. I'm going to stay for about 5 minutes, but I appreciate that.
Okay, and so we'll move on to Emily. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Emily!
Well, it's my pleasure this morning to give you a brief overview of the concept we've been talking about together with our hotel community for probably about a year and a half now, I would say. So just I'll tell you a little bit about what it is and then tell you where we are in our process and what would be ahead as we proceed further. So first of all, for a bit of background, in 2021, the Virginia General Assembly created legislation that allows any locality to create its own Tourism Improvement District or TID plan. So around 2023, when it became more clear in Virginia that this could be done and done pretty easily with Richmond developing its own TID. I brought forward to our hotel general managers committee with the chamber this concept to see if they were interested. Now, this is a public-private partnership, so it's not something that the county says we're going to do this or the hotel say we're going to do this. We do it together, step by step. So, and to describe what it is, the TID raises funds for tourism promotion through a fee, not a tax, but a self-imposed fee that's passed through to the hotel guest to create funds for marketing and sales of tourism in the destination that directly benefit the hotel community. So the bottom line purpose of it is to drive additional overnight hotel stays, which results, of course, in hotel revenue, but additional benefits of that are spending at local restaurants, as we've been talking about, stores, other local businesses. So there's a lot of benefit that's around it, but the intent of the legislation is really the direct benefit for the hotel community. So the way that it works is the hotels collect this front fee from the guests. They remit that assessment to the county. And then the county passes that funding back through to a separate nonprofit TID corporation that is, in our case, not yet developed. And it's a little bit different for jurisdictions around the state because in our case, we're sort of a rare case where our destination marketing organization resides within our local county government. In most other cases around the state, our destination marketing organization is a nonprofit entity in many cases. But when these fees are collected and then remitted to the TID corporation, then the TID corporation works in partnership with the jurisdiction's official destination marketing organization, which in our case is the Arlington Convention and Visitor Service. And together we implement this TID plan that results in room nights, additional overnight stays. But the long-term result is really a stable source of funding for tourism promotion. I know many of you in this room have heard my presentations over the years, and the way that our tourism funding is structured is a little bit challenging compared to that of our competitors because we get 0.25% of the total transient occupancy tax collections, which in our case for this year and next year is roughly $1.5 million. So really, I think I've covered the goal and kind of the benefits of it. But together, we've been working with our hotel community, and I'll just tell you a little bit about what we've been doing, where we are now, and we'll go from there. So I want to give you first an example of what does a TID do and how does it benefit our hotel community. This is based on a projected budget of a 1% assessment fee, and that would be about $5.1 million in a year based on about the last year of hotel revenue data. This is not a firm percentage that has been decided upon by the hotel community at this point. That's just kind of been a working number for us. And what they are going to be doing is developing a district plan draft. Actually, we have a draft, and I'll kind of go through the step-by-step process of where that is. But the steering committee we established has created a district plan draft, and it includes the district plan defines the wide array of activities that the TID is allowed to do. It does not mean that those are what it actually does, but these are the types of activities that could be done. Really an expansion of advertising for Arlington, could be national, could be international, could focus in on certain markets. We've talked a lot, especially in light of some of these federal challenges that we're facing, what markets might we need to turn to help make up for those differences in federal government business or contractor business or association business that's related to government. So this would allow us to really be creative and turning to other markets. Also PR initiatives, meeting and group incentives, expansion of a lot of different things we've been doing, new sales shows, et cetera. But I want to tell you kind of a real world example that I know we shared, I think last fall after our Arlington Hotel Summit. So most of you will recall we did get a $3.25 million federal grant for tourism recovery after COVID, the ARPA grant. We did a study that we released last July through a firm called Tourism Economics that showed that for 2023, and this was focused specifically on our ACVS sales and marketing activities, that we brought approximately 83,000 additional Arlington visitors who spent $29 million at our hotels and local businesses and generated $3.8 million in local taxes. So put another way, for every dollar invested, we generated $9 in visitor spending. So we think this would really be a mutually beneficial opportunity, depending on what makes sense, of course, for our hotel partners. So next on to the formation steps. We last summer did a competitive procurement and we are working with a consulting firm called Civitas. They are really the leader in TID formation, having done 200 plus TIDs across the country and even some internationally. We have engaged them, and then starting in October, late October of last year, we formed a TID steering committee. Two of those members are in the room, Kate Baith and Ben Joseph, and also several of us from AED have been working as staff with the committee, Ithia Kibanga and Kate Angie, and myself and Scott Baker on our team. So we're really making progress. The district plan is drafted. We've shared that now with the various departments in the county that would touch that through, their various responsibilities, management and finance, commissioner of the revenue, et cetera. And now we've also held several education sessions. So even starting last year at the very beginning, before we really got in depth, we worked with the chamber and gathered a lot of hotel ownership and leadership together to kind of make sure there was even consensus to move forward with exploring that. And now as we've gotten further, our most recent conversations were about 3 or 4 weeks ago with hotel leadership, seeing the draft of the district plan, talking about the percentage potential fee and going from there. But also the Virginia code requires that there is a partnership with or establishment of a nonprofit corporation to administer that. And that's been a little bit of a challenge point for us, but we kind of think we're making some progress, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the very end. But you'll also see that the hotel, well, I'll share with you, and maybe Kate and Ben can speak to this as well. There definitely at this point seems generally to be consensus that this would be very beneficial to Arlington as a destination and to the hotel specifically. So, it's all to be determined. And of course, there's also, a petition drive that's required, and that's planned probably for spring and summer. As we get through these final steps, you'll see the timing's not super precise, but the legislation does require a petition drive. It requires the approval of more than 50% of the hotels that are driving the revenue that is funding the TID. The goal would really to have more than 80%. It would not really be something you would do if you had 51%. It really needs to be supported by as many as possible. Also, let's see. Oh, and then of course the legislative process. So there is a TID ordinance that would be written based on the district plan that's approved by the hotels. And then that would go through all of the steps of the request to advertise and the public hearings and all of those steps, a vote by the county board as they consider it. And then really the next step at that point would be collection starting at some point. We had originally tried to align our process with this current fiscal year for the FY26 budget planning process, but it was just getting very tight. We didn't want, there to be pressure for approving it too quickly. And we wanted to be sure all the hotels had time to consider that. So it could be that this could be moving along and potentially passed in this summer or fall. And then we do have to figure out exactly whether the TID collections could take place off the fiscal year cycle or whether they would need to be aligned with the next fiscal year cycle, which would be July 1st of next year. So I think that covers most of the basics, except for that I did want to share the full steering committee list. And this is a mix of various hotel brands, various hotel ownership, hotel types, et cetera. So it's a really good representation, I think, across the hotel community. Several of those represent multiple properties, which is a good thing. And then, of course, I mentioned those of us in our AED team who are participating. But I think that's kind of the basics, and I really wanted to just kind of open it up for questions and also open it up first to Kate and Ben in case you'd like to add to the discussion. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. So I would just add that this has been a really collaborative process, and we realized at the EDC exec that this is moving along for far enough that we thought it was appropriate to update the full EDC. From the chamber standpoint, we look to our hoteliers and say, is this something you want? And so this has been a very, very long process, as Emily alluded to. It's similar. I see Tracy back there and Andy, of course, almost like bid expansion or bid creation that you just went through with National Landing bid expanding. But it really is reach out to the stakeholders and see, and we've heard overwhelmingly that yes, this is something that the hotels feel would be beneficial for them. In contrast to the meals tax, these funds go directly back for tourism. So they are also looking at what the fee structure is for nearby jurisdictions, just like we're doing with the meals tax. They still feel like this could be competitive and are not worried about that as a hindrance. So, that has been a big piece of the process, is making sure, again, that this is something that our hotels feel will have this great added value. Emily's done many presentations over the years to this group and others, but we are significantly underfunded for tourism compared to any of our neighbors. We've got really great charts and data around that. Emily and her team do amazing work. Also, lately, they have some really great technology tools that specifically show and track the input and the direct revenue that's coming back as a result of people seeing their ads, clicking on something on one of their pages. So it's a very, very data-based as well, which has been terrific. So that's just a little bit about process. While this may seem new to all of you, it's been something that's been going on for years. And again, very, very hotelier driven on, is this something that you all think would be a value add? Process-wise, you are among the first to hear, and we are exploring is the key word, a more formal partnership with the chamber. So as we moved this forward, the original plan and hope was that this would be fully housed within ACVS, within AED. But, again, that structure that Emily alluded to, there does need to be this fully separate group. So given the Chamber's Hotel General Managers Committee and our extensive partnership, both formal and informal, Steve, who's currently our board chair, as I've shared, Steve Cooper, not Fedorchak, although he's great too, and I are having our first official meeting with Emily and her team to talk about exploring if the chamber might be the appropriate home for the TID. But again, exploratory mode, have to make sure, again, that for align and figure out exactly what that would look like.
Kate, you're saying the chamber being a nonprofit.
Right. And again, the goal is to have as little additional management separation. It's really, the money is funneling to all of the great work that Emily and her team is doing.
Thank you, Kate. And I think another way to add to what you said is that structure would facilitate sort of an easy expansion of activities that we've known have proven to work and to generate revenue for everyone's benefit here. I did leave out a very important point. I'm looking at Angie, because we talked about this last week, but the EDC role obviously is important as we speak today. So the legislative process is the point at which the EDC potentially would have another update and make sure you were ready if you wanted to get together as a commission to advocate for that would be the point at which you would do that.
One note, I mean, this should be hopefully, as we look at budget challenges, this should be a budget solution in terms of providing this sustained funding. So yes, technically the county board does need to approve it, but it really just takes pressure off the general fund by having this money going in.
Yeah, and from an approval standpoint, I mean, given that like the goal is 80% support from the hoteliers, like it seems like there's good alignment. Ben, did you have anything to add relative to how this is going?
Yeah, just one more thing to add. I think given everything that's happened in the last 45 days, I think this, for us, gains much more significance. I think one of the things that Emily pointed out is we probably have to go and compete for businesses that we typically in the past, historically, have not had to because of all the federal programs that we get or groups that we get. But then since that's on a decline, we have to backfill it with something else. And I think this is going to be a huge part of that, especially given how well Richmond has done the last couple of years that they've had this. So.
Brad.
It was a great presentation. I'm not overly familiar with the TIDs, but to me, it seems like a no-brainer. So I was just curious, where have you seen pushback or where might you see pushback, just so we can be aware of that?
So, I mean, like any new increase, again, just a lot of data things, one of probably the only real concern might even be too strong was things around logistics on collection and credit card fees is one very in the weeds case that we've talked about, is that the operators still have to pay the credit card fees on all funds that are passed through. And it seems like there's no workaround to that. The person who's raised that, I suspect will probably ultimately still be supportive of it. And again, it is their vote. That is the only I can think of. Opposition is too strong, but logistical barrier. And anything else that you would add?
I was going to say another question that arose was about how federal currently tax exempt transactions would be treated. And our understanding is that this would be treated exactly the same way that the transient occupancy tax and other taxes are treated. So that seemed to alleviate that concern. I think the only other issue that's been discussed was that percentage amount. You can do this as a dollar amount per hotel stay. You could do it as a percentage amount. So that's been an internal discussion among the hotels to see what they felt competitively that they were comfortable tolerating. I will say that in the draft district plan, there's a range identified. So if at some point there was something very economically concerning, they could lower that on an annual basis or raise it on an annual basis. So there's a lot of flexibility that's built into that district plan. And so that's the key process we've been focused on.
One governance question. So who does the TID corporation answer to? Is there like a board or?
Yes, exactly. So this would be a relatively simple, streamlined structure there would be a TID board that was virtually all comprised of members of that hotel community. Potentially, I think like others that the board.
And who selects?
Built into the bylaws, but yes, there would be a board.
And who selects the board members?
I believe it is established in the bylaws, which we haven't done yet, but it would, the TID steering committee would create the bylaws, which would designate the types of people on the board. And then I guess the board would, the board would choose its membership based on the bylaws.
How, again, the bids are set up that, it would be based on who's paying in, but you'd have to, obviously somebody would have to help with the initial group getting them launched, but then ultimately the board would be selected.
Great. Any other questions or comments?
I wondered if Kate or Ryan had anything else. Did I miss anything? Okay.
Okay, Emily, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all.
Okay. We'll turn it over to Nick and Matt for CMRI updates.
Sure, I'll just be very quick. Just a quick data point update. Mark, I think Mark's still down. But we're about 100 days in since the adaptive reuse went into play, and my understanding is the pipeline now is at 3 projects comprising 4 buildings. In total, it'd be about 800,000 square feet, which I think is fantastic. There's been a lot of news recently of 3601 Wilson just down the street. So
Is that included in that 4?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and there's another one I don't know what it is yet, but I think it's very close. And that, at least from my perspective, seems like a really good start. Matt?
Yeah, and then at the meeting we had a few weeks ago, we talked about goals for this year, and I think there was a pretty strong desire from the working group to build on success from adaptive reuse last year, building that out to, partial redevelopments for full-scale redevelopments, things like that are kind of framed already in the policy that was adopted with adaptive reuse. So there's that, and there also was a lot of discussion about pushing for amendments to the GLUB study process. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that, but basically it's the process that is the process before the entitlement process. It's multi-year, and it's really it's something that I think the community, the developer community, the business community, nobody's happy at staff, nobody's really happy about it. So I think there's an opportunity to possibly make some changes there. I know staff is looking at presenting options to the board in Q2 about how to tweak that. So we're going to monitor that, but I think there is strong interest from everyone to seeing that changed.
Great. All right, thank you, guys. Evan, any updates on transportation?
Yeah, really quickly. Caitlin put in your packet the presentation from the last Arlington Transportation Advisory Group meeting I attended. We're at the stage of the process where the language for the vision and goals that the county has for updating the master transportation plan is being fleshed out. So if you look at the last sheet of the presentation, I'll just read it really quickly. Draft vision goals: Arlington's transportation network enables people of all backgrounds and abilities to move safely, comfortably, and seamlessly. Everyone can depend on a variety of transportation options to get them where they need to go, when they need to be there. Arlington focuses on making travel a good experience for people, connecting them with nature, friends, family, and jobs. It's kind of I think, a motherhood and apple pie kind of statement. There's nothing really to object to, but I've been asked to solicit feedback from the group. If you think that reflects our shared, for EDC, if that reflects our shared priorities and values, is clear and aspirational about the future. Ask you if you see any missing priorities or values, or if you have any just general community feedback. I went to an open house that was held last week at the Central Library and put in my 2 cents that just there's nothing in that statement that sort of speaks to the importance of a robust transportation network for supporting a vibrant economy. And if I were to change anything, it would be, or what I really like about it is the notion of flexibility in the transportation. And so I sort of tried to highlight that. But if any of you have any feedback for me, please feel free to reach back if there's anything you want to contribute, or reach out to Caitlin again, who sent this around. So thanks.
So Evan, homework assignment is feedback specifically to the vision statement or all the slides?
The vision statement, and then they have these little symbols of what's supposed to be embodied in there. So all of the above.
Great, thank you for that update. Any new or old business from anyone? All right on time. Thank you, guys.